Good Wednesday afternoon to you, 4 o'clock time for Sports4CLE. Thanks for joining us. Hope you're having a good afternoon. NFL draft only a few weeks away now. Let's take a look at some free agent signings. This is from Fansided, the 20 best value signings in free agency so far. Number one, they say, is Russell Wilson of the Steelers. Number two, wide receiver Marquise Brown went to the Chiefs. And number three, the Browns. Maurice Hurst, defensive tackle, one of a number that are in the top 20 for the Browns. Number 7, defensive tackle Quentin Jefferson. Number 13, another one of those defensive tackles that Andrew Berry signed, Shelby Harris. And number 19, edge rusher Zadarius Smith, also back with the Browns. So 4 of the top 20 belong to the Browns. Let's welcome in Fred Greetham, senior analyst for the Orange and Brown Report. Fred, I kind of agree with it. The signings weren't real splashy, but they were impactful, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it has been kind of a non-spectacular offseason, and you know, we're so used to firing coaches and getting new players and all the drama. This has become a stable franchise, dare I say, and there's not a lot of drama, not a lot of big surprises. I mean, a lot of it, they maintained the number one defense, at least statistically, by bringing them back. And the only 2 starters as of right now, I think on the whole, both sides of the ball, are the 2 linebackers, Anthony Walker and Sion Takitaki. And I think they upgraded at least one of those positions. And the defensive line, Jim Schwartz talked about, it's the engine, makes the defense go. And if it's not broke, why fix it? I think there's more tread on the tire for Zadarius Smith. I thought he played well. I think he can play even better and expect him to do. I think that was the key re-signing on the defense. But then Shelby Harris and Maurice Hurst, those were all moves that I asked them to make or thought would be prudent to make if they couldn't get a splash defensive tackle like a Christian Wilkins. I mean, when you got a guy like Harris who graded just about as good as some of those guys that were getting the big money, I mean, it can't help but be a win. And Maurice Hurst was a value signing last year, and he's a good player. It's just been he's had trouble staying on the field. And last year, unfortunately, when he got hurt again. So if he can stay on the field, you know, they really have a strong interior to add those 3 to Dalvin Tomlinson. And so we didn't even see last year's top pick on the defense, Siaki Ika, because he couldn't get on the field because of the rotation. So I like what they've done, and it's been a kind of the mark of a steady franchise is not going out and fixing all your problems, you know, by overpaying free agents. As we saw in the past with the Browns, many times they were drafting a guy in the 3rd, 4th round, expecting him to start. This year, you go into the draft, you really can make a case they can go anywhere because they have starters all around. They just need depth and young guys to come in and develop them.
So I know you've done an off-season reset. You know, we talked a lot about the moves that the Browns made, and I'm kind of going to combine a couple articles that you wrote. You wrote one on free agency and one on the draft. What do you think they could still do on the defensive side of the ball, both free agency and draft?
Yeah, I think that, you know, they've addressed almost every area. I don't expect really anything right now unless there's an offer to a veteran, like on a 1-year deal, like at linebacker or, you know, at one of the positions that appear to be in need that maybe the guy's been holding out and he's waiting, but before the draft he's afraid that the Browns will address that and there won't be an opportunity, so he may take that. But for the most part, I expect them to look at the draft, see what they can add. They have 5 picks right now, and then the undrafted free agents. And I would see any free agents probably being signed after the draft, after they kind of the dust clears and see what they have. I mean, this roster's pretty deep. There's a case that close to 40 of the 53 spots, if you look at guaranteed money and so forth, is pretty much allocated for. So unless there's major surprises, um, they're pretty set. Injuries always change things, but I think they can go anywhere. I think right now, you know, they're going to see what happens in the draft or even in a trade. If they make a trade for a veteran on draft day, send away a sixth, seventh round pick and pick up a guy, as a perceived star. They did that last year with Zadarius Smith, later after the beginning of free agency. So that's what I think right now is that, there won't be a lot of movement, see what they do in the draft, whether trades, something like that, and then address it after the draft.
So this is from Pro Football Focus, and it kind of goes along with what you say. State of all 32 franchises ahead of the draft. Browns, remaining starter needs, none. Remaining depth needs, defensive tackle, linebacker, interior offensive line. They say you can make a case the Browns have the best, and they say the best roster in the NFL, with the obvious exception of the quarterback position, where Deshaun Watson has not played consistently good football since 2020. If Cleveland can get good play from the quarterback position for a full season, this is a championship caliber roster. Well, he hasn't, the thing I would say about Watson, he hasn't been able to play consistently since the 2020 season. It's not consistently good. He just hasn't been on the field enough.
Yeah, that's the case I've been stating is that, he'd get started and then have to start over, especially last year. I mean, he was just had his best game against the Titans, then find out the shoulder injury, tried to play through it, couldn't, ended up the next month basically, would he, won't he? When he came back, he started to get going and played his best game against the Ravens in that come from behind win. I think it was 14 for 14 the second half, rallying the Browns to the win. And we find out later he has a broken bone in his shoulder as well as a high ankle sprain, and that was his season. So I think the case for him is just staying on the field. I think that if he plays 16, 17 games, he'll put up numbers that equal what Baker Mayfield did in the 2020 season when he threw 30 touchdowns. He just has to stay on the field. And I think the Browns can make the playoffs. They showed last year with just average to above average play from the quarterback. But if they want to go deep into the playoffs, Watson's going to have to get to close to that elite level. He might not be the best quarterback or even the top 5, but if he plays among the top 10, I think they have a chance to go pretty much anywhere because this roster is strong. And that's what I said. This offseason has not been flashy. You look at offense, I mean, the biggest move on the whole free agency was the trade for Jerry Jeudy. And that was before free agency really started. And everybody says, okay, now what? And that was pretty much it. So there could be things happening. But for the most part, I will continue to say it till I'm proven wrong, that number 4 has to play 16, 17 games, and then they have a chance to really play well. And you can point to the Bengals when Burrow went down. Everybody knew their season was pretty much over. And you can, Aaron Rodgers, you can state around the league, that when the franchise quarterback goes down, there's a reason they pay him so much money. So, yeah, no question Watson has to step it up. But I think if he stays on the field, I think if he'd have stayed on the field last year, he might not have had exemplary numbers, but I bet you people would be surprised with the number of touchdowns to interceptions he would have had when it was all said and done.
All right, so it's become official. It'll be the Eagles and the Packers playing in São Paulo, Brazil, Friday, September 6th to kick off the NFL season. The NFL season kicks off on that Thursday, but that same weekend. Browns still a contender, though, for an international game. It would be against Jacksonville and London. Other non-division teams on the Jaguars' home schedule: Patriots, Jets, Packers, and Vikings. Packers are in Brazil, Vikings, London, so that kind of leaves them off that international one. Means Patriots, Jets, and Browns, which likely means it's either the Jets or the Browns due to the quarterback position. So that I wouldn't be surprised at all if it's the Jaguars against the Browns in London. You got Trevor Lawrence against Deshaun Watson, two of the better teams in the AFC.
Yeah, I think, I don't know exactly the rules, but if I remember right, the Browns were due during the COVID year and they canceled all those games, so they got kind of put back, and it got, I think it was like every 4 years. I would think likely the Browns would be, close to being the pick there. I'm not a big fan of these international games, but I would think that they are overdue. I don't think they've been there, since what, 2017 or something. Yeah. So It's probably their turn. And, it's a little closer than Brazil, I guess.
Fred Greetham, senior analyst for the Orange and Brown Report. Now I can step aside, take a quick timeout. Other side of the break, we'll talk a little bit about the offensive moves this offseason. Sports for CLE. Be right back. Stay with us.
Play Maximum Millions and $2 million Ultimate Cash from the Ohio Lottery, and you may never look at scratch-offs the same way again.
We continue talking Browns with Fred Greetham, senior analyst from the Orange and Brown Report. This is from FS1 Speak. Former wide receiver James Jones, what he's seen from Deshaun Watson with the Browns.
Every time we talk Deshaun Watson, we keep on bringing up Texans.
Right. Little pass.
Where is he at? Where is the Texans' Deshaun Watson? Like, to be honest with you, when you think about what Cam Newton's saying, game changers and game men, this dude is labeled a game changer. That's why they gave him $230 million guarantee, because he was that type player. So now we finna say, if you have 185 yards and if you 210 total yards and 6 interceptions and 2 pick sixes and your team 5-1, that's good enough. This is arguably on the verge of being one of the worst trades in NFL history.
I agree with you, John.
With what the Texans received for Deshaun Watson. The man came off the couch in Joe Flacco and took this team to the playoffs. We should be talking them getting Deshaun Watson back. If it was the Deshaun Watson from Houston, this team going to the Super Bowl. Nobody's saying that because we haven't seen this dude in 3 years. To me, if you ain't seen somebody in 3 years, he gone.
Fred, I get it. Deshaun Watson didn't want to be suspended for the games he did. Now you can argue, his actions got him that. Getting hurt is getting hurt. I mean, you can't really hold that against him.
No, and I don't like to always sound like I'm defending him, but I watched last, from the beginning of training camp and watched him throw, watched him move, watched, quite closely. And I've watched training camps, quarterbacks, going back to Brian Sipe. I mean, I'm dating myself, but he's got all the tools, throws the ball as well as any that I've ever seen with the Browns, and I don't know if it's between his ears, the stigma. Certainly there's not a rust factor anymore, but I really think he wants to be successful. He's not taking the money and just banking it and I'm not wanting to play. It's evident when he didn't tell the coaching staff or the trainers that he was hurt as bad as he was, after the Titans game, and then, stayed in the game with the Ravens, and, he could have just walked off and said, I don't need to do this. So I just think that, until he does it on the field, there's going to be these type of things, and that's why the Browns are under the radar. They're consistently You look at rankings at this time of the year, which are kind of ridiculous. They have the Browns, getting third or fourth place in the division, and that could happen. In this division, you could be first, you could be last. I mean, it really comes down to injuries and stuff like that many times with this. And so I just think that's why I keep saying he's got to stay healthy. He's got to learn to go down or go out of bounds, not take hits, and stay on the field. And I think that the low bar would be that he would still average a couple touchdowns a game, and he might not have the numbers, the gaudy numbers that he had in those 3 years that he was a Pro Bowler. But I don't know how he couldn't. They have a lot of weapons for him, and I just think that he's going to get it together here this year.
Yeah, and again, I agree with James Jones. If he plays, like he's capable of playing, they're a Super Bowl contender without question. All right, you did an off-season reset as well with the offensive moves and what the Browns could do in the draft there. What are you thinking in terms of the way they have kind of added to this offense?
Well, they returned everybody on their starting lineup, and with the exception at the end of the year, they listed Nick Harris as the starting fullback, where they used to list 2 tight ends or 3 wide receivers. So you lost Harris, but you picked up Jerry Jeudy, so I would think they'll probably list 3 wide receivers, which would be Jeudy, Elijah Moore, and Amari Cooper. So you have more weapons than you had last year. They didn't make big moves other than depth. They addressed the special teams, with the gadget guy like Naeem Hines and Dante Foreman, kind of insurance to be the Kareem Hunt role for Nick Chubb. And so I really would have liked them to maybe have a little more proven wide receiver than what Jerry Jeudy has done. They signed him or traded for him more of upside potential, and I get why they did. They've liked him, but I'd like to have a guy that kind of like an Amari Cooper, that is going to walk out there and really be a top caliber. We didn't see a lot from Elijah Moore. He was traded for, again, with the potential. Doesn't mean he won't have a big year. Doesn't mean Jeudy won't have a big year. But for the most part, I think it circles right back to number 4. If Deshaun Watson's on the field, slinging the ball to Njoku and Cooper and getting, to the backs and moving the ball himself, I think this offense will be fine. Like I said, they won 11 games with 5 different starting quarterbacks last year, and I don't see how it's going to be a worse case if you have your quarterback on the field for the whole season.
Yeah, let's take a look at this. This is kind of interesting. So it's most draft capital spent on wide receivers in the last 5 years. This is from Warren Sharp. So Ravens 1. That hasn't worked out for them. Eagles 2, Broncos 3, Seahawks 4, 49ers 5. Browns have spent 26th, so bottom part of this. Only the Panthers, Saints, Bears, Jaguars, Bills, and Buccaneers left less draft capital spent on the wide receiver position. Do you think wide receivers still in play in that second round, third round, or do you think they look? The line is getting older as well. I would imagine that's an area they look to get younger at.
I think they can go any direction, to be honest with you. Best player available, and the better teams do that. They could take a tackle. If last year I don't think anybody had DeJuan Jones being available in the 4th round. I don't think they're going to reach for somebody, but they could take a tackle. It just depends on what they really are thinking about Jedrick Wills. They have him for this year. Do they think he's the extension guy? You look at, they were 26th, I think, on that list on wide receiver. Well, they've been taking wide receivers in the 3rd round, and it's not much with Anthony Schwartz. So with David Bell. Cedric Tillman, the jury's out. you could say the Browns value cornerbacks. They use their draft capital, at the top of the draft on cornerbacks. Team like the Bengals used it on wide receivers, Jamar Chase and T. Higgins and guys like that. So sometimes it correlates to when you're picking. When you don't have a first round pick, it's a little different. So I really think, like I said, they can go linebacker. They could go defensive tackle. They can get a Michael Hall from Ohio State. Maybe they could get an offensive tackle like Kingsley from BYU. They could get a wide receiver. I wrote today, maybe a Troy Franklin. It depends on who is available for them. I really think they can go all around. The biggest need on offense, I think, right now is a tight end, but I think it's more of a backup, and they could take Sanders or somebody like that from Texas. So I really think what happens above them, they could trade down if there's nobody they really want, or they could trade up if there's somebody they really specifically want. Right now, they're in a win-now mode, and they're looking at guys that can help them this year, as well as develop down the road. So, they're all over the place. But I just really think right now it's kind of a really roll of the dice to try to see a mock draft on who the Browns are going to take at 54, because last year their top pick was at 44. Everybody thought they needed a wide receiver, and they traded it for Elijah Moore. You could almost say that Andrew Berry so far hasn't looked like he's done that great in drafting wide receivers. So maybe you're better to trade for one, trade for a veteran like he did with Amari Cooper, or he did for Jerry Jeudy, or he did for Elijah Moore. So they could even trade for a guy at another position if they feel that's a better way to go. So I really think it's open to them. They could do a lot of different things when it comes to draft, for sure.
Fred Greetham, senior analyst from the Orange and Brown Report. Now I'm going to step aside, take one more time out, other side of the break. Talk a little bit about Greg Newsome and the Browns roster. Sports4CLE. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
We continue talking Browns with Fred Greetham, senior analyst from the Orange and Brown Report. This from Brian Baldinger, NFL Total Access. Top 5 AFC teams as we speak. He goes Chiefs 1, Ravens 2, Jets 3, Texans 4, Steelers 5. Freddie, we've talked a little bit about it. I don't know that the Ravens lost some pieces in free agency. Texans I like, Jets okay, I guess. But again, it's early to be doing that. I think the Browns roster is right up there with anybody in the NFL.
Well, we talked about it, kind of like beating the dead horse, and the reason this comes out is because it's competitive, obviously, in the AFC, but your quarterback hasn't played amongst the top 5 in the NFL. Now, it might be a stretch that you think that Russell Wilson is going to be that great, or Justin Fields. That could really be the difference there. But it's surprising that he didn't have Joe Burrow and the Bengals among there either. But the Ravens they're kind of like the Steelers. They're a good organization, and you think they lose a lot of guys, and all of a sudden they show up and they're in good shape again. If their quarterback plays well, they seem to be in the mix. Those teams you mentioned all have a quarterback, that last year went the whole season, and Mahomes and Jackson, and they're, I think Wilson, other than getting benched with Denver, and C.J. Stroud. So it's all about the quarterback position. You have to have the rest of the roster, but until Deshaun Watson does it week in, week out, the Browns aren't going to be, in the mix and the talk. And I think at this time last year it was similar because it's such an unknown, that really counting on him. And if he stays on the field, I think they'll be fine. And you could say that with most teams. I mean, I think it's a stretch to say that Aaron Rodgers is going to step right in and be awesome, at 40, 41 years old, a year removed from not playing. So, yeah, it's really a guesswork at this point. And just like anything, we all are on these shows talking and trying to fill time, waiting for the draft and real football to start up.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about Greg Newsome. Fifth-year option. Most people think it will be picked up. And when his fifth-year option is picked up, he'll be due $4.05 million 2024, $13.38 million 2025. He's been really good. You see the numbers and you see that. What do you think happens with Greg Newsome?
Well, I think the history with Andrew Berry, guys he's drafted, they get to their fifth year, it gets picked up. I mean, Baker Mayfield's fifth-year option was picked up, and then they traded for Deshaun Watson. And I kind of agree with, don't move on until you have somebody better. Now, with that said, I wouldn't be surprised if they felt they could acquire a starting caliber cornerback, a veteran, or even draft one in this draft, that they would trade him, on draft day if they felt like there was an asset available. But if they go through the draft, do not trade him. I think the fifth-year option is due the 1st of May. They may do that ahead of the draft, or they may even wait till after the draft. There is some last year, we all know that Newsome talked about not liking being used in the slot, and he switched agents, hired Drew Rosenhaus, who is known for getting trades with players when they're not happy and using leverage. And that was a year before he was even eligible for an extension. So, I think the big thing there is he didn't want to be penciled as being a slot corner because they only make about half what an outside cornerback makes. And I think that's smoothed over with the Browns. But as you point out, he's a deal this year and even next year, even if they don't decide to keep him long term. But I think he's clearly the third corner behind Ward and Emerson. They value corners, and it comes down to how highly do you value Cam Mitchell? Do you think he is as good as Newsome or better than Newsome? Otherwise, you put yourself at a disadvantage, with injuries always occurring at cornerback, if you weaken yourself at the position without an adequate replacement. So, yeah, I agree he's going to have his fifth year picked up, and then that gives him another year to evaluate. I mean, a lot of fans saw him getting torched against the Texans in that final game last year, but it wasn't just him. There was a lot of guys being exposed, and so I think that, yeah, he needs to play better. His stats look pretty good, but I don't know if he is even the top two on the current roster.
Yeah, that's absolutely fair. And the thing that complicates it, Martin Emerson was a third-round pick. There's no fifth-year option, so they come up against each other in a contract year. After Newsome's fifth-year option, it would be time to redo Emerson's contract. So it's a timing issue as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And, and that's how everything works. But it just seems like Andrew Berry has really been masterful with the salary cap. And, I think they have more 10 million plus players on this roster. And I just don't know how many more you can handle. But so far he's done a good job of doing it, and they've done a good job of developing them. But it seems like every year they've been drafting a cornerback. I think that could tell what they do in the draft. If they drafted a cornerback with their second or third round pick, I think it could raise some eyebrows, and that could tell you that they may be moving on from Newsome. But as of right now, I think the right move is to, unless you have a replacement or an upgrade, you go with what you have and you find to make it work.
Fred Greetham, senior analyst for the Orange and Brown Report, as always. Great stuff. Appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much, Fred.
Sounds good. Thanks, Dave.
Fred Greetham, make sure you read him. Orange and Brown Report. He is the senior analyst. Always really good and insightful Browns coverage. We're going to step aside, take a quick time out. We continue talking Browns. Tim Bielik from the Plain Dealer, cleveland.com. Straight ahead. Stay with us. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program is dedicated to recognizing exceptional students, teachers, and schools throughout Ohio. Scan the QR code on screen to nominate students and teachers as Academic All-Stars and Teachers of the Month. They must be currently enrolled or teach in grades K through 12. Is your K through 12 school developing students' literacy skills to achieve success in reading? If so, you can nominate your school for the School of the Year. Students can win $100, teachers can win $500, and schools can win $2,500. Scan the QR code, fill out the forms, and nominate deserving students, teachers, and schools today. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program takes pride in honoring exceptional students, teachers, and schools across Ohio. Submit your nomination today. It's fun, fast, and free. We continue talking Browns on Sports4CLE. This from FS1 Speak again. It's Emmanuel Acho. Is this a make-or-break season for Deshaun Watson?
He won't get broke this season, so I don't know that it is a make-or-break season. The reason being there are three ways to start in the National Football League, especially a quarterback. Your team wins, you ball individually, or you're paid a lot of money. Your team wins, you ball individually, or you're paid a lot of money. Deshaun's paid a lot of money, so he's good there. Let's talk about the other two. He's never been bad or not balled. In Houston, when they were 4-12, he led the league in passing touchdowns or passing yards. Last year, for as bad as he played, they were still 5-1. You extrapolate that over the course of a season, maybe they're 10-3, maybe he's 10-3 rather, assume he gets hurt. Maybe they go 11-5 with Deshaun instead of Flacco, PJ Walker, etc. So even had Deshaun played average, because Joe Flacco did not play great, go look at his numbers. If they just win, he's still safe. If he plays great, he's still safe, and he's paid, so he's safe. So I don't think it's a make-or-break season. But if he does play terribly, Joy, I don't know that he'll ever start again. Obviously, he'll be in the league, but I don't know. Man, if you got three bad years in a row, oof.
With that, let's welcome in Tim Bielik from the Plain Dealer, cleveland.com. Availability has been his biggest challenge. I mean, that they can say whatever they want to say. 8-4 as a starter for the Browns. He just hadn't been in. Now, the suspension, it's kind of on him. Injuries happen in the NFL. That's not on him, even a little.
Yeah, I mean, I even go back to, the 2023 NFL draft. I remember them talking about Bryce Young, and I'm trying to remember who it was. I think it was Booger McFarland to say something like, quarterbacks are going to get injured. There's just no way around it. And, that's just kind of what, unfortunately for the Browns, with Deshaun Watson happened with him. You would have hoped that in 2023 he would have been able to stay on the field for, a bunch of games, like 10, 12 minimum, and, show progression. And he started off slowly. I mean, I don't think anybody's going to say, he was good against Pittsburgh. He wasn't. He really struggled in that game. But after that game, the three he played, the vast majority of are finished. He looked good. The Titans game, the Cardinals game, and especially the second half of the Ravens game, he looked good. First half of that game, obviously, of the Baltimore game, obviously it was not. But the biggest thing with Watson, you pointed to, he's got to be on the field. I mean, that's the bottom line. He simply has to play. I mean, 12 games he's played in out of 35, including a playoff game, and in one of those he didn't. I don't even think he got out of the first quarter in that Colts game. So maybe 11 and a quarter of the possible games. That's not even a third of the potential games he could have played in the last two seasons. So, bottom line, got to find a way to stay healthy. I've said it all off season. He's got to find a way when he's on the field to protect himself, because whether he's struggling or not, the most important thing is he's got to be out there, because he's not going to get back to Deshaun Watson if he's not playing out there every single game that he can.
So this is kind of interesting as well. Last two seasons, this is Amari Cooper's production compared to the rest of the Browns' receiving core. So he has 31.2% of the receiving yards. That's over 2,400. 32.5% of the receiving touchdowns, 14. And 34.4 of the contested catches, 30 of them. That's sounding like a guy that is likely to get an extension in the near future.
Yeah, I mean, these last 2 seasons have proven he's a number one receiver. May not be, the high end number one like guys like Jamar Chase and and Justin Jefferson are, but he's still a legitimate number one receiver. You've seen that, no matter who the Browns have had a quarterback at times, especially with PJ Walker and Dorian Thompson-Robinson when they've played, they've thrown the ball to Amari Cooper. Usually good things have happened. He's a guy that is capable of playing at a good level without necessarily having a great quarterback throwing him the football. It just shows, well, Andrew Berry's got to continue to find, other options of receiver. Obviously, he was aggressive again, getting Jerry Jeudy. I still have a lot of high belief in Cedric Tillman. I think he's going to step forward this year. And now they just got a full year of understanding what he has to do in a pro offense and adjusting to what he came from in Tennessee. I think Elijah Moore going into, the final year of his rookie deal, now that the Browns have a better idea to use him, I think he'll be better. Obviously, you still have David Njoku. But, the last part of that tweet that makes it a good point is, Brown's got to be able to use one of those early picks they have, either 54, maybe a trade down, or 85 on another receiver. You got to keep adding to that because, I mean, with teams like the Kansas City Chiefs, you're not going to be able to stop them. You got to outscore them. You have a number one in Amari Cooper, but now you got to build around him and add more to him.
So this was kind of interesting as well. This is from QB Unplugged, which is the podcast with Deshaun Watson and his personal quarterback coach, Quincy Avery. Kevin Stefanski was a special guest on the last one, and Stefanski and Deshaun Watson walked us through a play.
What we're trying to do is make the play look like something and then it's not.
Yep.
And with Nick Chubb back there, we're under center in this formation. We're trying to make this look like wide zone football. So those initial steps for the defense should look like that. And then this is a max protection, so we're keeping Dave in up top and he's pass blocking. What's so interesting about this play is this protection is not, we don't want to test this protection, meaning this protection is not going to block up every type of pressure. And guess what? Here's Deshaun under center, and they're bringing a pressure into it. So first things first, he should look over the sideline and be like, hey, dude, don't call that in that pressure. But what do? You call plays thinking about players.
Okay.
And what happens on this play is our players make this work. And you'll see our guard here, in this case I think it's Wyatt, he pops out originally thinking he's going to go help Dave Njoku. Instead, he feels that pressure coming. He's able to come back. So now Deshaun has to navigate a loud pocket. We always talk about, hey, it'd be great to have a clean pocket every single time. That doesn't happen. So here's Deshaun navigating a clean pocket, able to step up in that pocket and then deliver a ball to Elijah on really what amounts to a double move.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I saw the pressure. And usually on play action, we take about, 8 to 9 steps. I kind of quickened my steps up a little bit, stepped up in the pocket. And I think this game was the first game where it was super rainy. So for me, you see Elijah wide open, I don't want to overthrow him. You're not going to miss a wide open guy like that. So I gave him a catchable ball, and, the rest is up to him.
And Tim, it's really interesting just to hear Kevin Stefanski about, you call plays thinking of players, and Deshaun Watson, he's open, it's wet, just don't overthrow him. Those are the two things that really stuck out. And hearing guys talk through plays, listen to what they're saying.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of fascinating. You almost always want to hear that stuff, and it's amazing all that stuff, happens in 3 to 4 seconds. I mean, that clip was about 2 minutes long, and that's stuff that happens in a microsecond or even less than that. You're just talking about quick decisions, quick reactions, and those sorts of things. And I think that's kind of what Kevin Stefanski's talking about is players, not plays. That's what I think modern NFL coaching has become. It's not so much, what are these plays you're calling? It's how can we get, so-and-so an opportunity to touch the football there. And obviously he was talking about the offensive line protection, Deshaun understanding, how he's got to adjust, and even just those things, understanding the conditions, which he's still getting used to. Remember, he played most of his pro career in a dome in Houston, going out to the elements at Cleveland Browns Stadium. It had to be a complete, adjustment for him. Understanding, just get the ball to a wide open receiver, don't overthrow him again. All that stuff you have to think about in about a short window that's about 3 seconds long. It's absolutely tremendous, the processing ability that these quarterbacks have just to play, at the NFL level, let alone play at an elite level.
Yeah, the other thing is, think about Kevin Stefanski saying you're trying to call plays for players. Think players, not plays. how much do you think he wants to coach Deshaun Watson, given that and given the quarterbacks that he's – and it's nothing against any of the other quarterbacks. Deshaun Watson has the most skill by far of any of the quarterbacks he's had, including Kirk Cousins.
I mean, he's been in a handful of Pro Bowls for a reason. He's led the league in passing, for a reason. I mean, the talent is still there with Deshaun Watson. It goes back to kind of what we were saying earlier. You got to be available to stay on the football field and let that talent show through. But I think, as I said earlier, the longer he plays into a season, the better he seems to get, just getting that game speed, staying at that game speed. And I think, just once that familiarity continues to build, that's when the talent should show out. And I think, after these last 2 seasons, I know there's, changes with the offensive staff. They brought in Ken Dorsey. They brought in Andy Dickerson. So they're going to probably have some tweaks to the offense, especially on the offensive line, as far as scheme and whatever. But Stefanski still has a pretty good idea of what he and Deshaun Watson wants Deshaun Watson to do and what Watson likes and those sorts of things. And going into year 3 of this partnership, as long as Watson stays healthy again, no reason he shouldn't be able to produce the way you would expect him to, given what the Browns gave up in the trade and how much money he's being paid.
Tim Bielik and I are going to step aside, take a quick time out, other side of the break. Since 2000, what is the Browns' best draft? We'll tell you what CBSSports.com thinks when Sports for CLE continues. Stay with us.
Play Maximum Millions and $2 million Ultimate Cash from the Ohio Lottery, and you may never look at scratch-offs the same way again.
We continue talking Browns with Tim Bielik from the Plain Dealer and cleveland.com. This from CBS Sports. Every team's best draft class since 2000. They go with the 2018 draft class of the Browns. It was Baker Mayfield, first-round first pick. Denzel Ward, first-round fourth pick. Austin Corbett, second-round 33rd pick. Nick Chubb, second-round 35th pick. And then after that, it was not great. It was Chad Thomas, Antonio Callaway. Jannard Avery played a few years in the league. Ratley and Simeon Thomas. But I guess, the first 4 are pretty good. The second one and the fourth one are really good, being Denzel Ward and Nick Chubb.
I mean, anytime you get 2 players who are the best of their respective positions in one draft, including a guy in Nick Chubb who's arguably the best running back in football, that's a pretty good draft, I would say. Obviously, considering the Browns, even just looking at their draft history right now, prior to that, they've found some good players, Joe Thomas, Joe Hayden, Alex Mack, but by and large, those drafts have largely been misses. But to get, 2 absolute studs who have been, nothing but, big-time players for this team is massive. Even if you look at Baker Mayfield, yeah, in hindsight, he wasn't the guy you hoped you would have taken it the first overall pick. You see what Josh Allen has become, Lamar Jackson has become. I think you have to give Baker a little credit for at least, elevating the standard of the football of the Browns, because remember, they were 1-31, the previous 2 seasons. They had just had the second winless season, the second 0-16 season in NFL history behind the 2008 Detroit Lions. I mean, there's something to be said about being the quarterback that helps get them to respectability and helps them win their first playoff game since the 90s. So there's something to be said for all of that. Obviously, they moved on from Baker because he's not what they hoped he would have been. Now we'll see if in Tampa he can prove that, what he did in 2023 wasn't a fluke. But again, to get those 3 guys that have helped essentially change the culture of the Browns, I mean, it's easy to see why it's the best draft they've had since coming back in the league.
All right, so this one from Jordan Reed, tweeting this out. Last time teams drafted these positions in the first 2 rounds of the draft, Rams edge rusher was 2011, Steelers interior offensive lineman 2012, Chiefs tackle 2013, Niners cornerback 2014, Browns interior defensive line, so D tackles 2015. It's kind of interesting. So keep that in mind when you see these mock drafts that have the Browns projected to take defensive tackles. Haven't taken a defensive tackle almost 10 years, 9 years, 2015.
Danny Shelton all the way back in the day,
Yikes.
That's yeah. I mean, it's what's more disappointing is he was probably the best of those 4 first-round picks they had in that 2-year span, if you think about it. So, but looking at this draft, obviously, I talked plenty about how good this defensive tackle class is. The Browns have really, I think, they've done a solid job of restocking this defensive tackle group with solid veterans behind Dalvin Tomlinson. I do think this is, if they were going to stay at 54, which I've said before, I would probably trade out of 54 and get an extra pick within that top 100 if possible, or that top 125 maybe. I would do it. But, if you're going to stay put, there's defensive tackles we're taking, especially, the guys on opposite ends of the game. Michael Hall from Ohio State, Chris Jenkins from Michigan. Either guy I think would be well worth the pick at 54, even though they're kind of very different types of defensive tackles. You want to keep adding that position. I've said 1,000 times that, I think that position is kind of a pseudo redshirt position where you don't want to expect too much out of those guys in the beginning. Maybe that's kind of why you don't go with those guys necessarily early, but I think those 2 guys in particular would be worth that, second round choice.
So this one from Dog Pound Daily, 3 prospects the Browns need to avoid in the 2024 draft. Number 3, they say Tavondre Sweat. Sweat could be a similar prospect to Siaka Ika, listed 6'4". Sweat did better in testing than Ika, but his tape shows a player who is slow off the snap and offers little explosion. Throw in the recent arrest for DWI, it makes sense to pass on him. Number 2, Bucky Irving. Standing just 5'9", 192 pounds, Irving isn't built to be an every down back in the NFL. That means anyone adding him should be looking for a committee approach. Cleveland already has several players who can succeed in committee, including Foreman, Ford, and Hines. Number 1, Xavier Worthy. Set a new combine record, 4.21 in the 40 dash at the combine. Also incredibly thin, just 165 pounds, which is why Trevor Sikkema, PFF, calls him boom or bust prospect. Sweat, I saw Dane Brugler had a 4th round grade on him, and even before, so this was published before the DWI, there were some concerns about his off the field antics. So that now we got 2 red flags going up on that one. Worthy's a guy that, and I get the 165, and he looks more like a football player than a track guy, which I wouldn't have said about Anthony Schwartz. Maybe that's the wrong guy to compare him to, but Worthy, he's intriguing.
Yeah, I mean, of those 3, I would say Worthy is the guy that would concern me the most. I mean, I think he's certainly better than John Ross was when he came out of Washington when he set the combine speed record. And again, a young guy, you would expect him to add on weight, as he naturally gets older. But I think there would be, some questions, as far as taking Worthy. Yeah, he's a speed merchant. He's the best speed merchant in this draft. There's no question about it. But I think for what the Browns kind of would need, a receiver, that would kind of be where I go away from. The one guy, other guy mentioned on receiver, running back, Bucky Irving. I'm not nearly as down on Bucky Irving as this article is. I think he's not a speedster. I think that's pretty clear when you look at the film. But what he is, he's elusive, and he doesn't lose speed when he bends the corner. He's got fluidity, and he can get to top speed very quickly, and he is tough. I mean, one of the toughest, sub 200-pound running backs you're going to find. And, that's not a guy you want to have as a bell cow running back, but how do we know the Browns want to have a bell cow running back? I think what we've seen from Kevin Stefanski in the past few years is he likes his tandem backfields. He wants multiple guys to get the football to keep the legs fresh for as long as possible. I mean, even when they had Nick Chubb, they still had Kareem Hunt to hand the football to. And, Jerome Ford has obviously kind of, become that number 2 guy, had to be the number 1 for the vast majority of the season with Chubb out. And even then, they still gave other guys opportunities to carry the football. But with Tavondre Sweat, I get the Siaki Ika comparisons. I get that. But I think Sweat's a better player than Siaki Ika. I think he's a better athlete than Siaki Ika. I think he's more disruptive than Ika was. I get the character concerns. And obviously, the DWI right before the draft, it's a bad sign. And we know teams value culture. We know that, teams want to bring good culture players into a locker room. But there's also always those times when, GMs feel like, a player's talented enough where you want to see, even if he has some questionable character concerns or whatever, that you bring him into the locker room, you feel confident in your culture, that you'll get him, straightened down, get him in the direction he wants to go. Again, these guys are all young guys. These are like, early 20s, 23 years old, 24 years old at the very most. They still got time to mature. And I think ultimately, considering those things about Devondre Sweat, maybe the best place for him is a team that really has a great established culture in place where he could just, he'll have to fall in line and, just mature within that structure so he could show what kind of player he is.
Tim Bielik from the Plain Dealer, cleveland.com, and I are going to step aside, take one more time out, other side of the break. We'll take a look at a couple of mock drafts. Plus, Tim has written an article, Surprising Things the Browns Could Do in the 2024 Draft. We'll dive into that when Sports for CLE continues. Stay with us.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
We continue talking Browns with Tim Bielik from the Plain Dealer and cleveland.com. This from CBS Sports, they're with the First Pick podcast. Ryan Wilson, Josh Edwards of CBSSports.com, a mock draft of rounds 2 and 3, making the second and third round picks for the Browns.
So I think having few needs on your roster kind of gives you the luxury of taking the best player available. And to me, that is Edgerrin Cooper, the linebacker from Texas A&M. So I would go in that direction personally. I didn't think I was going to take a linebacker at this point, but just the way that the board fell, it's kind of tough to pass.
Well, the other thing is this, right? Linebackers feel like running backs in that they are undervalued are overvalued as first round picks. Like, you're not going to take one in the first round, but once you get in the second round, go crazy. I'm going to go Mason Smith. We'll see. I want to see what the running backs look like when we get back at 156, Harry. So now you have Edge Cooper, Mason Smith, 2 defensive picks on a defense that was dominant for much of the season.
So, Tim, you heard him allude to the running backs. He passed on Trey Benson. Like, all of the running backs were available. He ended up going Mason Smith. Defensive tackle, I get it. They also passed on Malachi Corley twice. He was available in the third round, and they passed on him both times. Mason Smith is a guy that I know the Browns visited with. We heard him at the Combine. He's intriguing, a former 5-star kind of guy.
Yeah, I mean, he's kind of a, project, I guess. Maybe it's, I know people hear the word project and there's negative connotations, but I think Smith is kind of the project in the sense that there's such a high ceiling with him. He could still add someone. He's thinking about 305 pounds, and he's only 3 years out of high school, so he's got a lot of time to grow, get stronger. I've said before, defensive tackles kind of a redshirt position anyway, so why not take a project, a guy who has that kind of athleticism that Mason Smith has? Put him in there, behind the veterans that you have, and just kind of continue to cultivate him behind the sidelines. Behind the scenes, let Jim Schwartz work with him, and let him grow over the next year or two before you kind of unleash him maybe in the second half of 2025 into 2026. But going to the other pick with Edgerrin Cooper, and I'm going to write this by the end of this week, 3 hot takes I think I have about what the Browns should do in this draft. And I think we're not talking enough about the linebacker position, because I look at the depth chart right now for linebacker. I mean, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah looks like the only guy I could say for 100% that is probably going to be part of the future going forward. We know he could get extended, his contract extended at the end of the season, but after that you got a couple of veterans in there, Jordan Hicks and Devin Bush. After that, there's just a lot of question marks. So why not use a pick, whether it's that second round pick? Maybe Edgerrin Cooper is a guy like, a true 3-down linebacker to play opposite JOK, and I think he's got the size to complement him. I also like Junior Colson in Michigan in that spot to kind of be in there, but I do think we're not talking enough about linebacker being a position that Andrew Berry should address. I know it's not a premium position. The importance of it has gone down over time, and you maybe play 2 the vast majority of the time because how many times NFL teams go to 3, 4, 5 receivers, but to have at least another solid young starter potentially who has, the ability to play all 3 downs. I think that's something that can't be overlooked in this draft. Is something that I would try to target.
We'll get to one more mock draft, but let's talk about your article first. Surprising things the Browns could do in 2024 draft. Number one, you have the Browns make 5 or fewer draft picks.
Andrew Berry loves draft picks. I mean, I can't imagine he's sitting there with his 5 picks and thinking that that's nearly enough for him. Obviously we know he loves to trade down, and I've said before, this is the kind of year to trade down, especially with just 2 picks in the top 150. I said before that that's not enough. They need to get another, and possibly if they can get 2 more out of that situation. So I feel like unless there's a true guy with a true first-round grade sitting there at 54, I would be ready to just back out of that pick, try and drop down 10 to 12 spots, maybe with a team like the Cardinals or the Commanders who have multiple 3rd-round picks, and see if you can try to get 2 of them to slide back.
The second thing you have is the Browns trade Greg Newsome.
Well, this goes back to a mock I had recently where I had the Browns trading Newsome to the Arizona Cardinals. That was basically a hypothetical exercise. And, Mary Kay Cabot wrote about a week ago in the Browns Insider talking, about what Andrew Berry said at the NFL league meeting, saying they value Greg Newsome and essentially dismissed the rumors that, he could go. I know there's, you would have to give him a 5th-year option, and that's a pretty good chunk of cap you had to pay to a 3rd corner, especially if, Martin Emerson seems like he's the number 2 guy. But, there's a lot of reason. There's a pretty good reason why you would keep Greg Newsome there, because you have this trio of corners that have proven to be successful over the past couple seasons. Why not keep them together another year and keep that pass defense, as one of the best in football?
And 3, the Browns pass on a receiver.
I swear I did not mean for that last one to be a pun there. But I look at this draft, I said before, this is a borderline generational receiver draft at the top and in terms of depth. There's so many guys that could be 1st-round picks. I've said potentially any of 9 different guys had the potential to go in the 1st round. I'm not saying, the Browns should definitely stay 54 and draft a receiver, but I feel like if they don't take one with one of their first 2 picks in this draft, or just not even take one entirely, that feels like a mistake to me. Like I've said before, I still believe in Cedric Tillman. I think he's going to have a much better year 2 now that he's kind of continued to acclimate to the pro game and understanding what he has to do as far as nuance goes to have success there. And especially, again, the number of reps he did, late in his rookie season had to help him tremendously just to understand all those sorts of things. But, we talk about in the NFL, you can't have enough receivers. And like I said, going up against teams like the Chiefs and the Bengals, you're not going to be able to stop them. You have to outscore them, and that means continuing to load up a receiver. I know Andrew Berry's taken one each of the last 4 drafts, so wouldn't be surprised if he does one this time. He hasn't found a long-term answer, but you got to keep swinging until you have that guy. You don't just stop swinging the bat if you don't hit the pitch. You got to keep just being aggressive, try and find a guy, and, eventually, numbers say you will find a guy that sticks and becomes, a contributor, maybe a high-level starter, maybe even a Pro Bowler. I mean, we've seen Andrew Berry be able to find some high-level players, in the middle rounds of the last 2 drafts with Martin Emerson and DeJuan Jones.
Yeah, earlier in the show, we kind of showed the tweet that the Browns have spent 26th, so one of the fewest in the league. 26 out of 32 is how much draft capital they've expended at wide receiver the last 5 years. All right, before I let you go, Mel Kiper from ESPN came out with a 2-round mock draft today, and he has the Browns taking Braden Fisk, defensive tackle. Cleveland could look for a wide receiver and offensive lineman in round 2, but I see depth along the D-line as a more pressing hole. Fisk, my 2nd-ranked defensive tackle, had a stellar combine workout showing top-level physical traits, 12 sacks in his 2 seasons at FSU. He also played at Western Michigan before he entered the portal and went to FSU. Tim, I know people are going to poo-poo the age guardrail, and I think that will be pushed back a little bit because underclassmen aren't going in the draft because of the NIL deals.
Right. Yeah, I do agree to an extent. The age guardrails may have to be, put on hold this year more than any others. But I feel like still with Andrew Berry, how important age is, in his draft picks. His history has shown that, when possible, he goes to the younger players when possible. And I don't know if I could see a situation where if, there were a couple players with an even grade and, you have Braden Fisk, who's 24, not just 23, but 24 years old. At the end of his rookie deal, he's going to be, 27, 28 years old. And, second contract, that would already put him into his 30s. That's just something I have a hard time seeing Andrew Berry do. Now, that said, he could certainly do it. I think Braden Fisk is an outstanding player, a tremendous prospect. He was outstanding in the Senior Bowl, absolutely disruptive in the interior. Great numbers at Florida State proved that, he wasn't just a star in the MAC, that he could come into the Power 5 to Florida State, a team that went undefeated in the regular season and have a high impact. Talent-wise, he would certainly fit at 54, but again, the Browns more than any other team in the NFL right now focus on age, and they make that a priority. And that's not a disqualifier, but that just tells me, until otherwise, it doesn't feel as likely as going in another direction. Like, for example, if Michael Hall was there.
Tim Bielik, plain dealer, cleveland.com, as always. Really good stuff. Appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much, Tim.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. Have a good day.
Tim Bielik, make sure you check him out. Always really good stuff relative to the Browns, draft and free agency. Plain dealer and cleveland.com. It's going to do it for this edition of Sports for CLE. We'll see you back here tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Have a great night, everybody. See you tomorrow at 4 on Sports for CLE.